I'll be talking today about the steps we're taking to use data and artificial intelligence to improve our product. But before that, probably worth explaining who we are. Most people ask me, well, what's the researchfish? I have no idea. The guy that created the business just came up with the idea of researching and fishing, so I don't know. But in terms of the questions, from my perspective, I've worked for the business for a year now. I've spent a year just understanding the world in which I'm now involved in terms of research. But in terms of the product and researchfish itself, our system provides a platform for funders and research organisations to collect and report research impact. And the data that's provided on the system is then used by funders to steer strategic direction in terms of funding. A bit of information about the organisation. So we've been collecting data for 10 years. So we started as a pilot project that was worked with the Medical Research Council and a small company who were working with them to start to collect information around impact. And now we have 75 funders and we have £50 billion worth of funded projects in the system. We work with 90 research organisations and we have over 87,000 users that enter information onto the system. Just to give you a flavour of some of the people that we work with all of the leading research organisations under the umbrella of UKRI. Probably the most obvious one that's missing from that is the Wellcome Trust. So they've just signed up, so they are in the process of onboarding with us at the moment, and they'll be using the system as of the next submission period. In terms of the research organisations, we work with the major universities within the UK. We also work with a lot of the large national charities as well. Again, all of these people are putting impact into our system. As a product manager, when I'm working with, whether I'm talking to my development team or whether I'm talking to clients or people outside, I tend to have 3 criteria for the work that we're doing for the product. So it has to improve user experience, it has to enhance the quality of the data that we are collecting, and it has to enable our users to be able to visualize, search, and also explore the data that we're producing. We have a wide variety of data that's collected. So in terms of there are 16 categories that we collect under. So the funding organisations that we work with, they predetermine this list of the information that's collected, and then we try and group it to make it a little bit more palatable for everybody in terms of looking at it. This list and the questions asked are led by the organisations. So we have a steering group that actually the funders and the research organisations and the researchers actually work with us to determine the list and the questions that we ask in terms of that. The collection of data is actually where we start our journey in terms of the automation and improving that user experience. The initial version of the product was very much manual form, so it was a case of researchers having to fill in quite a lot of data manually. And some of it still is manual. But in terms of the feedback we got from the researchers, they said, we don't really want to have to keep repeating ourselves and filling in the data. We've already filled it in once already, or in fact, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And the feedback from the funders and the research organisations was that some of the quality of data, the actual data that we were providing that was in the system, there were some question marks around that. So that led to us to then start a project in terms of looking at how we can use the technology to improve that collection of data. We chose publications as our first port of call. The fact we have so many in the system is number one. Number two, the fact that you have a unique identifier for a publication means that we can use that when we start to track and start to pull that data in from other sources. Our approach was to have partnerships, so through interoperability, to work with the leading publishers and other organisations to start to collect data. So the system works in that we have an API, we have API connections with all of these organisations, and there are other organisations that we're currently working with as well. The feedback that we got from the researchers was very positive, so we implemented it for the last submission period. And when we asked, we got some feedback from about 6,000 researchers who the overriding positive response we got was around the publications and the fact that it was a lot easier to be able to search and to just be able to pull the data in that they've already entered somewhere else. But publications is only the tip of the iceberg. There are other areas that we also collect data that we're now working on. We're planning to deliver before the end of this year further work in terms of spin-outs and commercial products working with third-party systems. With regards to the further funding, we have an opportunity to put up to 3 million funded awards into the system, where we're accessing our own data, so we're putting our own data into the system, but we're also engaging with 10 other worldwide organisations, which include the Australian and American government, to bring that data together. Currently it's manual, so it's a very painful process. Obviously, there are other areas that we can also have a look at. So with regards to these further areas, we're actually looking to improve the way in which we're collecting the data. So we would be using natural language learning to create algorithms which will allow us to begin to ask the question. So we've got a lot of data that's already in the system for these areas. And instead of having the user having to enter it every time, what we'll start to do is to provide the system with some suggested responses. The idea being that we make a better user experience, we collect good data, and that the data can be richer. We talked about the collection and the description of data, so but now sort of going on to talk about the discovery and the understanding of the data that we have. Currently, organisations worldwide use our data to help with their reporting and impact reports. So this is an example of an international funder who has used researchfish data in their reporting. So they were looking at high-level questions around enhancing the health and well-being of the economy, of their people, and also looking at the growth in their economy. So we were able to provide them, using the data in researchfish, they were able to use that data in the reporting that they've done. Taking this to the next level for us, now obviously the data collection is really important, but the other areas that we want to look at is to be able to expand on that. So the ability to be able to make the data discoverable and to expand the opportunities for looking at the data. So currently, our users are able to download the data via Excel, Word, or SQL. What we're trying to do now is to provide a system whereby you can actually search and have a 360 view of the data. So, for example, funders will go into the system and they can look at the awards, they could look at the people, they can start to look at the outputs, the actual projects that have been done. And the opportunities really are that we can then start to look at the stories behind the data that's in the system, and being able to understand the data. Because one of the key things that our funders are asking us now with the conversations that we're having is that they have all this data. We've got so much data out there, but actually just trying to understand it and to trying to determine what we should be doing next. So that's what we're trying to do, and that's what we'll be doing with the work on the system. Another area that we're looking to work on, and part of the conversations that we're having with our funders, is looking at visualization. So one of our funders came to us and said, we need to understand how and why and what our collaborations are. So we looked at it in terms of the world, in terms of a geographic map to start with. So the opportunity here for them to understand exactly where they're, so this was the first time that they'd ever actually geographically seen what funding was going on and where it was going on. This enables them to understand the data in terms of where they're actually, where they are investing their time and money, and potentially where they should be looking for the areas where they're not investing. we also took that to a next level in terms of we started to split that down. So we were looking at collaborations in other sectors. So we looked at the private sector, the charity and the not-for-profit sector, and universities and academics. Again, this gave them the opportunity to just understand where their data was and how they could then use that data. For us, where we want to take this to the future, the feedback from our clients is, as I've said, the idea that we have the data and we just need to be able to explore it and to expand that and to understand some of the stories. There's some really rich information in the data that we've got, and it's just a case of trying to actually get that data out. One example would be, for example, the idea that when we do find that cure for cancer, the idea that there is a rich story from the very first piece of investment that was done through all of the people. Hello. Oh, fine. In terms of that story, in terms of that initial bit of investment, and then it may be that there were some spin-outs, there were some publications, and the people that were involved in that. One of the other areas we're looking at is a career tracker. So we're actually starting to look at how people have shaped impact within this sphere. For me, I'm confident that using AI will enable us to further understand the data and be able to ask those questions. At the moment, we're actually working with our funders to ask what those key questions are, because for them to give us those key questions, we can then start to build a system that will answer those questions. Thank you. That's me finished. Thank you.
Turns out you didn't need the warning.
No, I didn't.
We have a lot of time for questions, so does anybody have any questions? I have a question.
Do you?
On the visualizations that you showed, were there anything that your clients didn't expect? Was it something that was completely new to them, or did they say, okay, yeah, that's what I was expecting?
No, so the information that was useful for them was just the areas that, it was things like this, for example. They actually didn't realise quite how much investment had been put into Paris, for example. They hadn't quite looked at it from a geographic terms, and this visual was able to then show them that.
And did they make any different decisions on the back of this?
They are now looking to make different decisions. This is quite a recent piece of information that they're now looking to shape the future of their investments.
Thank you.
Going forward.
Any other questions? I'll come to you. I don't know how I ended up with the mic.
Hi, Michelle Rennie, Computer Law. Looking at the visualization, does the program create visualizations of external data? So
yeah, dark data. Yeah, so
if we feed you data, can you then create the visualization for
yeah, that's one of the areas that we're looking to explore. So we describe it as dark impact. So there's areas of impact where we don't know because we haven't got it in our system, or the funders don't have that information. So we're looking to widen the amount of information that we've got. So we're looking at widening the markets to NGOs, to looking at the pharmaceuticals as well, and then being able to bring all that data in to then actually give us a full picture of it, of research worldwide.
Yeah, it's easier when you're actually trying to demonstrate something, because I act for lots of big multinationals as well as startups, to show them, for example, visually where investment is in a particular area, if they're dealing in AI, or if they're looking at software, looking at databases, or they're looking at something completely different.
Yes.
Is to say, okay, here are both the users, so you need to have where the uptake is in their particular field, but also where there's maybe funding behind. So that is a really good and powerful tool to be able to use for external. So even that is a tool by itself, an AI tool, to be able to roll out would be excellent.
So this is something that we're working on at the moment.
Yeah. As a secondary point, why is the Paris so high? Is there because everybody wanted to go
idea.
there?
No, I don't know. I don't know.
And London actually was tiny on the next slide or the previous slide. There was very little, which is so surprising.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Again, it's about that visualization. The other thing, obviously, is that we can start to make connections and we can start to look at the patterns. So that's another part of the work that we're doing in terms of the using the technology to make to look at those patterns, and then to actually start to help the funders to make some decisions about where they should be investing their money going forward.
I think it's also important if you're doing a multinational with multilingual partners, because it shows them actually in a manner which they can understand as well, even if it's not in terms of text.
Which is where we are doing now as well. Yeah. So that's one of the expansion areas. Other than other sectors, it's more of an international, for us it's looking internationally.
No, that's a very good tool.
Any other questions? No? Okay, so let's give a round of applause to our speaker. Thank you very much, Ross.